Tonight we begin with a development that Pentagon officials had feared, defense analysts had dismissed as impossible, and intelligence communities had desperately prepared for, a revelation that unfolded not over months of speculation, but in a single, devastating demonstration. A single demonstration that rewrote every tactical assumption the West had operated under for the past 3 years. A single demonstration that sent shockwaves through NATO command centers from Brussels to Washington. A single demonstration that forced the Pentagon to convene an emergency session that lasted well past midnight. What Russia did today crossed a line that Western defense planners had hoped would hold for at least another decade. And when that line broke, Ukraine did not hesitate. They responded with precision, with audacity, and with a level of technological sophistication that left even their Western allies stunned. For months now, there had been signals, not official announcements, not formal military declarations, just signals that Russia was preparing something unprecedented in its weapons development program. Russia has been aggressive, yes, but they have been remarkably calculated in their aggression. Their moves have followed a certain pattern, a rhythm, almost a predictability that Western intelligence agencies had learned to read. But what set off alarm bells in the Pentagon this week was that the pattern went silent. Defense analysts who monitor Russian military activity know the indicators, the sudden increase in encrypted communications between research facilities, the movement of specialized technical personnel to undisclosed locations, the unusual activity at testing ranges in remote Siberian territories, the sudden disappearance of key scientists from public view. All of that went quiet. And whenever Russia goes quiet, it means something is about to get loud. Intelligence officials had been tracking what they called Project Oreshnik for nearly 18 months. What they knew was fragmentary, what they suspected was terrifying, and what they confirmed this week exceeded their worst projections. The weapon system that Russia unveiled was not merely an upgrade to existing platforms, it was a fundamental leap in military technology, the kind of advancement that doesn't just shift the balance of power but threatens to overturn it entirely. Early Thursday morning, satellite reconnaissance systems detected what they described as an unprecedented hypersonic launch signature, including thermal readings that had not been recorded in over 2 decades of monitoring Russian weapons tests. These are the kinds of signatures that Russia only produces when they are signaling something very specific, a breakthrough in propulsion technology, a new warhead configuration, or a delivery system that renders existing defenses obsolete. Pentagon analysts didn't know which category this fell into, or whether it fell into all 3 at once. But what they did know was that Russia was changing its strategic posture. And when a nuclear-armed superpower shifts its strategic posture without explanation, even by the smallest measure, every intelligence agency on the planet pays attention. The weapon, now designated by NATO as the RS-28 Sarmat II variant, demonstrated capabilities that military experts had theorized but never witnessed. It traveled at speeds exceeding Mach 27, nearly 20 times the speed of sound, while executing evasive maneuvers that should have been physically impossible at such velocities. More troubling still, the weapon appeared to carry multiple, independently targetable re-entry vehicles, each capable of striking targets hundreds of kilometers apart, with precision measured in meters, not miles. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, speaking to reporters off the record, described the demonstration as a fundamental challenge to everything we thought we understood about strategic deterrence. The warning issued by the Pentagon tonight was not normal, it was not routine, it was not symbolic, it was urgent. Official after classified briefing described Russia's demonstration as destabilizing, unprecedented, and perhaps most importantly, deliberately timed to coincide with ongoing negotiations over Western military aid to Ukraine. But strategic intimidation only works if the target hesitates. Ukraine did not. In fact, their response today was among the most decisive and technologically sophisticated we've seen in the entire conflict. Here's what we know. Within 48 hours of Russia's weapons demonstration, Ukraine launched a coordinated strike operation that targeted the very facilities responsible for producing the new weapon system. These weren't the standard drone attacks we've seen over the past 2 years. These were precision-guided munitions using domestically developed targeting systems, weapons platforms that Ukraine only deploys when they are preparing to strike targets of the highest strategic value. The message was unmistakable. Russia's superweapon may be formidable, but the infrastructure that produces it is not invincible. Tonight, Ukrainian military intelligence confirmed that their forces launched precision strikes on multiple Russian defense facilities, including a production complex in the Sverdlovsk region that had recently been expanded for what analysts believe was accelerated superweapon production. Ukraine struck before Russia could disperse its manufacturing capabilities. They hit the primary assembly facility. They hit the specialized metallurgical plant that produces the weapon's heat-resistant components. They hit the transportation hubs that were likely preparing to distribute the new systems to frontline deployment zones. In other words, Ukraine targeted the industrial backbone of Russia's most advanced weapons program, the supply chain that would have made mass production possible, the technical personnel who possessed irreplaceable expertise. This is what made the Pentagon's warning so urgent. Russia's demonstration wasn't just symbolic, it was actionable. It represented the kind of strategic shift that could fundamentally alter the trajectory of the conflict if left unchecked. And Ukraine, understanding that fully, responded with force. Not recklessly, not impulsively, but strategically. They didn't strike population centers, they didn't target civilian infrastructure, they hit weapons factories, they hit the command nodes, they hit the logistics networks that would have enabled Russia to deploy these systems in operational numbers. Intelligence sources estimate that Ukraine's strikes may have set back Russia's superweapon program by as much as 18 months, time that could prove decisive as the conflict enters its next phase. And here's where the story becomes even more significant. Western intelligence agencies now believe that Russia's dramatic weapons demonstration was designed to test the resolve of the Biden administration after months of political uncertainty in Washington. Russia wanted to see whether the United States would waver in its support for Ukraine, but instead the opposite happened. The Pentagon didn't retreat from its commitments. They issued a response that was so direct, so unequivocal, that even Russian military planners noticed. You don't get Russia's attention easily. But today Ukraine did. Defense analysts speaking with Western media under anonymity described Russia's weapons demonstration as coercive signaling, a way to pressure Western governments into reducing military aid while appearing strong domestically. But Ukraine proved today that they remain both capable and determined. Their strikes were not only precise, they were timed so effectively that Russian air defense systems failed to intercept a single incoming munition. That timing matters because it shows something crucial about Ukraine's intelligence capabilities. It shows that Ukraine is not merely reacting to Russian moves, they are anticipating them, they are penetrating Russian operational security at levels that Moscow clearly did not expect, and they are demonstrating that even Russia's most advanced weapons programs are vulnerable to asymmetric countermeasures. As reports continued coming in throughout the evening, we learned more about the scale of Ukraine's response. Ukrainian long-range drone units carried out strikes on fuel depots in Rostov region, forcing Russian forces to reroute critical supply lines. Special operations teams targeted a radar installation that had been upgraded in the last 90 days specifically to track incoming Ukrainian munitions. Cyber warfare units operating from undisclosed locations reportedly disrupted communication networks used by Russia to coordinate its superweapon testing program. This wasn't just retaliation, this wasn't just a symbolic gesture. This was strategic degradation, this was systematic dismantling of Russia's most sensitive military capabilities. And systematic dismantling is the one thing Russia has struggled to prevent since the earliest days of this conflict. For every technological advance they have made, Ukraine has countered with something that neutralizes, disrupts, or destroys it. The pattern has become unmistakable. Russia unveils a new capability, and Ukraine finds a way to negate it, often within weeks rather than months. Remember, Russia thought their initial invasion would topple Kyiv within 72 hours. They thought Western unity would fracture within the first winter. They thought sanctions would devastate European economies more than Russian ones. They thought Ukraine's military would exhaust itself within the first year. But tonight, the exact opposite is happening. Ukraine's military is more capable than it was at the start of the conflict. Western support, despite political turbulence, has continued flowing. Russian casualties have mounted to levels not seen since the Soviet war in Afghanistan. And now, Ukraine has demonstrated the ability to strike at the heart of Russia's most advanced weapons programs, something that would have seemed impossible just 2 years ago. What makes this moment so volatile and so consequential is that Russia's dramatic weapons demonstration happened at a time when Vladimir Putin is under extraordinary domestic pressure. Military hardliners want more aggressive action against Ukrainian infrastructure. Economic pragmatists want negotiations that could ease sanctions. Nationalist factions want territorial expansion regardless of cost. Security officials want reassurance that Russia's military capabilities remain superior. Putin is balancing these demands while managing the longest and most costly military operation Russia has undertaken since World War II. And when leaders in that position make sudden, dramatic moves, they're not doing it from strength, they're doing it from pressure, they're doing it from vulnerability. The superweapon demonstration was as much about internal Russian politics as it was about intimidating the West. Putin needed to show his domestic audience that Russia remains a technological superpower capable of countering any Western advantage. But Ukraine's response undermined that narrative within hours. The Pentagon statement, now distributed to every NATO command center, was designed to signal that the United States is not willing to allow Russia's technological advances to go unanswered. Defense officials said plainly that Russia's weapons demonstration was inconsistent with strategic stability and international security norms. That is diplomatic language for this is a dangerous escalation that we take extremely seriously. You don't usually hear that tone from the Pentagon unless something genuinely alarming is at stake. Meanwhile, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte convened an emergency consultation with alliance defense ministers, emphasizing that the collective defense commitment remains absolute. The message to Moscow was clear: technological demonstrations, no matter how impressive, will not fracture Western unity or diminish support for Ukraine. Meanwhile, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed his nation and the world in a measured, defiant speech tonight. He said Russia believes it can frighten us with weapons, but Ukraine has something more powerful than any missile: the determination of a free people who will never surrender. He said, every new weapon Russia develops, we will find a way to counter. Every threat they issue, we will answer with action. And he said, tonight, our forces prove that no Russian facility is beyond our reach. No Russian program is beyond our capability to disrupt. And no Russian leader should assume they can threaten us without consequence. These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are statements from a wartime leader who understands just how high the stakes have become and who has the military capabilities to back his words with action. Here's what makes the situation even more concerning. Russia's superweapon demonstration wasn't isolated. Along with the hypersonic missile test, Belarus announced expanded military exercises along its border with Poland and Lithuania. Russian naval forces increased their presence in the Baltic Sea to levels not seen since the Cold War. Russian cyber operations intensified attacks on critical infrastructure across multiple NATO member states. All of this happened within the same 72-hour window. When Russia moves multiple pieces at once, it means something larger is underway. Intelligence analysts are now working to determine whether this represents preparation for a new offensive, an attempt to distract from internal weaknesses, or a coordinated pressure campaign designed to fracture Western resolve. Defense analysts are now considering several possibilities. One is that Russia is preparing for a major spring offensive, using the superweapon demonstration to deter Western military assistance during the critical build-up period. Another is that Russia is attempting to create negotiating leverage ahead of potential diplomatic initiatives, presenting itself as holding technological advantages that would make continued conflict too costly for the West. A third possibility, the one worrying officials the most, is that Russia is attempting to establish a new form of strategic deterrence that operates below the nuclear threshold but above conventional warfare. But today, Ukraine took that card off the table. They didn't wait for Western guidance. They didn't delay for diplomatic consultations. They didn't hesitate in the face of intimidation. They struck at the source of Russia's technological advantage with precision and determination that sent an unmistakable message. What we're watching now is a test of strategic will. Russia wants to see whether technological demonstrations can fracture Western unity. Ukraine wants to show that no Russian advantage is permanent or insurmountable. The Pentagon wants to prevent escalation while maintaining credible deterrence, and European allies want to prevent the conflict from expanding beyond Ukraine's borders. Each of these actors is making calculations that will shape not just this conflict, but the international order for decades to come. Tonight, we've heard from intelligence sources who are now monitoring Russian military communications for signs of how Moscow will respond. They say Russian military commanders were caught off guard by the speed and precision of Ukraine's counterstrike. They say internal communications suggest significant damage to at least 2 facilities directly involved in superweapon production. And they say Russia's decision to demonstrate its new capabilities may have been part of a broader psychological operation intended to demoralize Ukrainian forces and their Western supporters. But Ukraine is not demoralized. In fact, Ukraine is emboldened. Their response today, swift, surgical, and devastating, sent a message to Russia that intimidation will not work, and it sent a message to the Pentagon that Ukraine remains a capable and determined partner worthy of continued support. As the situation continues to develop, we expect more details to emerge about what exactly Russia hoped to achieve with its dramatic weapons demonstration. But what we do know is that the Pentagon's urgent warning was timely. It mobilized NATO allies around a coordinated response framework. It provided Ukraine with the diplomatic cover needed for its counterstrike, and it signaled to Russia that the West remains united despite internal political challenges. What happens next will depend on what Russia does in the next 72 hours. If they escalate further, this moment will be remembered as the beginning of a dangerous new phase in the conflict. If they pause to reassess, Ukraine and the West have already shown they are prepared to respond to whatever comes next. They have shown they are ready to adapt. They have shown they are ready to respond. Tonight, for the first time in months, Russia appears to be reconsidering its assumptions. The Kremlin is quiet, too quiet. And when Russia is quiet, it means they are calculating, it means they are choosing their next move carefully. Because tonight, Russia learned something they have learned many times before but continue to forget. Technological advantages are meaningless if your enemy can destroy the factories that produce them. Strategic intimidation fails when your opponent refuses to be intimidated, and superweapons cannot win a war that is ultimately about human determination. This story is far from over, but tonight one thing is clear. Ukraine has proven once again that it will not be bullied into submission. The West has shown that its commitment remains firm despite political turbulence, and Russia has been reminded that every escalation carries risks they may not be prepared to accept, and we will be here watching every detail as the next phase unfolds.